Good afternoon to you. It's Merv here. I'm Secretary to the Benefits Management SIG. So let's get on to the topic today. What we're going to talk about is the portfolio benefits management data analytics. The project management profession is continuously evolving and increasingly leveraging business and technology innovations. Creating value from data is one of the highest priorities in business across all industries and services in the private and public sector. But how can we measure results and benefits and spot patterns and outliers using proven practice and modern tools and techniques? And this webinar is designed to develop your awareness and knowledge of data analytics and presentation in real life situations. Our speaker is Ian Stuart. Ian joined Altis Consulting's UK office in August 2015 and is a principal consultant. He has a wealth of experience as a consultant and solution architect of building large-scale data warehouses, data management systems, and reporting and analytics solutions. Ian has expertise in training and developing generic and bespoke data warehouse architectures and methodologies, and he also teaches data visualization principles. He has over 30 years of project management experience in the IT and construction sectors.
Without further ado, I just thought I'd start with that little quote, which sums up project management. For me, I think it's an incredibly difficult job. How can we make it easier? Thank you very much for inviting me along to speak at this webinar. I have given this talk a couple of times. I think from the responses I've seen, and I was giving my feedback, but you couldn't hear me. I think from the responses I saw to the questions, most of you should hopefully get something out of this. There was a far greater number of people that have had some training in data visualization principles than I expected, so 5% is more than normal. So let's move on. So the goal, as Merv briefly outlined today, is to give you some awareness and a knowledge of data analytics and data presentation, if you don't already have that. Understand how you might use data analytics and good data presentation in the context of portfolio and program management, and how that can address real life situations. Going to give you a bit of insight into industry best practices around data visualization, with the ultimate goal that you can boost value for your organizations. So that's the running order. I'm going to talk about the typical project management challenges and data visualization in project program and portfolio management, showing you some real life examples. Briefly talk about some of the tools available, and then 5-10 minutes doing some demos in a couple of those tools, best practices for data visualization, and how you might get started on this journey or improve your current offering. Just a brief aside, a little bit about Altis here. I don't want to give you a great spiel on us, but we have some exclusive partnerships with some industry thought leaders, and the one I'm going to be talking about today is Stephen Few in the middle there. He's the widely recognized as the world's leading guru on data visualization principles, and like most of us in this industry, so I've been in the data industry for over 20 years, and up to 3 years ago when I went on one of his courses, nobody had taught me about the principles of what works, and we're going to talk about those today. So it really changed my outlook and approach. So this is the suck eggs part of the presentation. So the challenges you face day to day. So you know all of these things, you have risks and issues. How do different projects integrate with each other? How do you control your costs, your schedule, scope, etc. With those responsibilities generally comes a lot of different systems, and you have a lovely spaghetti model there on the right. The systems are generally disparate and don't speak to each other very well. Whatever project management system you might be using, undoubtedly you've got a lot of Excel spreadsheets, most people do. The CRM system, ERP systems, SharePoint, finance and accountancy systems. They tend to be silos of information. So we might be able to get data from one, but not from another. and we can't join two sources of information. Poor data quality is a very common theme. The vast majority of the work we do, we have an element of data quality to sort out. How available is the data? Can you get it when you want it? Can you get it at all? Because of all those things, there tends to be a lot of manual processing going on, which is generally done in Excel. And that makes the whole thing very, very complex. On top of all that, project managers, portfolio managers don't have a lot of time to compile reports. They know they're important, or hopefully most of them realize that they might be important, but they don't really have a lot of time for it. It's probably not their core skill set. So what can we do to make that a little bit better? So the available techniques and tools enable us to collect data from those multiple systems and combine and store that in a common view ready for reporting. And then when we move on to the reporting, or data visualization as it's more recently known, we can explore the data, we can see patterns and trends, and we can find a much clearer way to communicate our message. Storytelling with data has become a saying recently, and that's really what we're trying to do, trying to get a story across using data and clear graphics. So this is one particular example. This was a very large construction company, and they had a problem that I hear a lot, that they had pretty good reporting at the project level. So every week, the project manager would put in a fairly standard report, and they could see the health of individual projects. What they didn't have was an overall view, the forest view of all of their projects. We were able to work with this company and bring in a vast amount of historical data, over 40 years worth of project data. When we did that, certain things popped out. One of the things was that they had a red light system, or red flags, red, amber, green indicators, basically. And by looking at the portfolio, we were able to see that some of these red, amber, green indicators had never gone red, and some of them had never gone green. So they obviously weren't very good indicators, because obviously the projects had either failed or succeeded. One of the other things that stands out from this slide is if you look bottom left at the risk score KPI, that's the overall risk, you can see a pattern to that line graph over the months of the year. And if you look at the visualization to the right of that, that's what we call small multiples, so a collection of little line graphs there. We can see that the second one down has a very, very similar pattern to the overall risk score. So that second one down may be a really good key indicator, probably the best indicator we've got of whether projects are going to fail or succeed. Down the bottom of there, we've got one that doesn't follow the pattern at all. So maybe that's one that we stop monitoring and stop measuring. So that helped them decide on how they could measure their projects. This next graphic, this is not the best reproduction or the best data visualization, actually. It's a little bit fuzzy, so apologies for that. Also, it uses red and green on the same display, and apparently about 8% of men are colorblind, and the most common form is red-green. So they may not be able to distinguish. I expect we've got a couple of people on the call at least that may have problems distinguishing between those red and green dots. Anyway, what's this showing? The top graph there is the percent complete of the project across the bottom axis, the x-axis, and on the y-axis we've got the projected profit. Now, we may have suspected, or portfolio managers may have suspected this was the case, but what we're seeing is early on in the projects, the project managers are generally saying, yes, we're going to be profitable. So we're getting all green dots. By the way, the size of the dots is the size of the project. And with one exception, there's one person that 20% through said, we're going to make a loss on this project. But generally, it wasn't until the later stages of the project that a lot of project managers were saying, we're going to make a loss. We can also see the bit of good news in here is that it's generally the smaller projects that are making a loss, so smaller dots, which is good because we're not losing so much money, and it probably lends us to thinking, okay, we need to tighten up on our cost management on these smaller projects. Also, the other thing we can see from this, we can actually see a lot from one very simple visualization. The other thing we can see from this is the gross profit margin is very, very low. 1% on average. Looking through that, with one of them up there at 8%. They also found that looking back through the history, they sent out a directive to try and be more profitable, and said, we don't want anybody to bid for projects that are less than a certain value, or less than a certain profit margin, so presumably 2% or something like that. And what they found was, looking at this, that 2% actually became the maximum. So you have to be careful of the behavior you drive. So that was one example. Another example that was very similar. This is a small construction company. Small as in the management layer was small, but they used a lot of subcontract labor. So they had a lot of projects. I'm not going to delve into too much detail here, but he wanted to analyze which projects were more successful than others, and modern tools allow you to slice and dice by a number of dimensions. So he looked at the size of the projects, and then he looked at sector, and he found that in the retail sector, he was far more profitable than any other sector. So he changed his marketing and approach to sell more to the retail sectors and increase his profits. Just want to talk about data visualization tools, what's available out there, what you can use to do this sort of thing. You can do a lot of this in Excel. I should say that before we move on, but also just pause briefly to say, well, why would you even invest time in doing this? And I think there's a couple of reasons, really. One, you're doing this anyway. You're spending a lot of time putting reports together. So why not do it quicker, more effectively? Invest a little bit of time and potentially a bit of money in a tool to make yourselves far more efficient and get a better result. Your offering is going to be far more valuable. You as a project manager, program manager, portfolio manager are going to be a more valuable person, I would suggest. When looking for tools, we often start with the Gartner Magic Quadrant. When looking for software, there's a Gartner Magic Quadrant for just about every sort of software. And so a couple of years ago, there was one came out for analytics tools. Top right of the quadrant are the market leaders. And we can see February 2017, we had 3 tools. There's a tool called ClickSense and a tool called ClickView. Tableau and Microsoft were there. Click arrived on the scene in 1993, Tableau 2003, I think, and Microsoft Power BI in 2015, and it quickly rose to the top. In 2018, the story was similar. Just flicking backwards and forwards between those 2 slides, we can see that Microsoft is still way out in front. And there's a few that are appearing. So there's Sisense in the bottom right-hand quadrant and MicroStrategy in the top left quadrant. I think Sisense, my personal prediction is that will arrive in the leader quadrant shortly. So we can start there to look at these tools. But there's other factors to consider, obviously cost, and what's good for the goose is not necessarily good for the gander. So we might recommend one tool for one organization and another tool for another organization. Okay, what do these tools look like and what can you do with them? Cut across now to look at Tableau to start with. So this is a project management data set that's already been brought into Tableau. So we can see we've got our fields on the left here. And there's a number of ways that we can build data visualizations. One of the ways I like to do this is choose the fields that I want So I'm going to just hold down Control. I want to look at duration, project, sector, contract date, and projected profit. And Tableau has a very nice little feature here called Show Me. It grays out the visualizations that are not available and highlights the one that it thinks is the best for you. So very, very clever. I don't actually want to use the recommended one. I want to use the Gantt chart. What I'd like to see here is how busy are we getting. All of these tools work with dates very cleverly in that if there's a date field, it will automatically create a date hierarchy, and we can click on that to drop down to quarters, then to months, which is the view I really want. So what I can see from here is how busy I am over the coming years. Obviously, this is an old data set. We're looking at 2011, 2012. So how busy I am by sector and project. And I can see, yeah, it's fairly spread out. So I've got a bit of an overlap here. But here, I've got 3 projects that are running concurrently. But the color intensity is giving me the projected profit. And I can hover over and get the tooltips to see I'm making £10,000 profit on that project, only 2,000 on that one. So perhaps I want to move that bottom project back or bring the top one forward if I possibly can. So very, very simply done with just a simple data set. Another one that we've got here. So here I want to look at gross profit margin percentage, revenue, and I want to do that by office. Again, it's suggested a scatter plot. This time I'm going to go with the scatter plot and see what it brings up. Well, the first thing it brings up, it shows me all these things. I don't really know what they are. I do if I hover over. But the first thing that jumps out from there is I've got an outlier. So I've got this outlier here. And if I can look at that, it's telling me it's consulting. That says to me, I think you've got a problem. You've got a data quality problem. So I'm going to drop my office into the filters. Then I can see all my offices. And I can see I've got a mixture. Obviously, this is an Australian data set. I've got a mixture of states and projects. So let me get rid of those particular ones and apply that. It may not be a data quality problem, but I'm assuming it is. And we can see now if I drop office as well onto our label here, we can see New South Wales, we're doing the most work there, no surprises, and it's fairly high profit as well. And down here, Australian Capital Territories, less work and only around 4.5% profit margin. So very quick visualization there. Just jumping over to another tool, Power BI. When we open Power BI, we get presented with a splash screen here. And one of the options is to get data. And I just wanted to show you how easy it is to get data from scratch in most of these tools. You can see we're prompted with a whole host of sources. The underlying story is you can probably get data from just about anything. The world's most universal database, of course, is Excel. So let's get data from there. I'm going to open this one here. What it's now doing is looking at that Excel spreadsheet, Excel workbook, and seeing how many tabs are in it, how many sheets are in it. And it's now going to present me with its analysis and say, which sheets do you want? Well, I only want the one. I could have more than one, and it will now preview the data for me. So I can see it and say, that's okay. I have an option to load it as is or edit it. So if there was data quality problems or I wanted to add some more columns, add some calculations or whatever, I could go and edit, but I will just load because I know the data's fairly good. Now it's bringing the data in, it's looking at each column, working out the data types. Is it a textual data type? Is it numeric? And it's brought the fields in now for me. And what I can see there is all of the fields on the right, and the numeric ones have got this little sigma button next to them. So I want to look at benefit versus feasibility, and I actually want to see that as a scatter chart. And let's go into focus mode on that, and I've just got one dot, and that's because it's decided to sum those for me. I don't want them summed. I don't want either of them summed. And what I now get is a load of dots across there, and I could add on a little bit more information so I know something about these dots. So if I hover over them, I can see that the subject area is financial reporting, and that the first fact table is S405, whatever that may mean. A little bit of formatting on this, and I'm only talking maybe an hour or two, and you could end up with something like this. So one I prepared earlier. So this was a real project. It's a project that I ran, and it was a data warehouse build. And we have the luxury in building data warehouses. We can very often choose where we start, and that decision is going to be made on the benefits and the feasibility. So how easy is it to do, and what's the benefit? So what we can do here is say, okay, let's get rid of anything that's not feasible, and let's just look at the highest benefits. So we break it right down. We'd already done a proof of concept here and built some, so let's just take out the ones we've already built, and guess what? The ones we'd already built were in the top right-hand corner. So maximum benefit, maximum feasibility. So we were left really with these ones. So I was able to have a very informed conversation with the project sponsor from the client, and they chose to start with the HR and then training and capability subject areas. That was a brief overview of tools. Let's go back to my slide deck. Having good tools, and the tools have really improved over the last few years. They're much easier to use. What you can do in a few minutes now, or an hour or two, in older tools used to sometimes take days or weeks. Having good tools is one thing, but it may only improve the speed of which you can produce bad data visualizations. And unfortunately, there's a lot of bad data visualization out there. So it's not only what we present, but the way we present it has a huge impact on whether our message is understood, how it's interpreted, could be interpreted badly, and if it's not understood, it's probably not going to be used. Carla Fiorina, Executive and President of Hewlett Packard, said the goal is to transform data into information and information into insight. And I would add to that, so we can make better informed decisions. So I'm going to give you a few good and bad examples. So 3D is disappearing. Thankfully, I think people are getting the message that it doesn't really add anything, apart from it looks very flash. So a question here for yourselves just to think about. So if we are company G, which company contributes more to the market share, company A or us, company G? And also, could you list in order the major competitors? It's very difficult to do from that. And when I've done this live with audiences, it's about 50-50 would say company A and company G. And it's because they're very close. But in a line chart there on the right, we can see that our company is slightly longer. We've also made it easier by ordering that bar chart there from top to bottom, and we've highlighted our company as well. So it gets the message across really, really quickly and easy. Our audience doesn't have to work at it, they can see. Another problem is area. So how much bigger is the right-hand circle than the left-hand one? Again, let's have a think about it, but we get huge variances of answers on this, from 2 to 30 times. If you do a little bit of schoolboy maths, the one on the right is 16 times bigger. I don't know how many of you got that right, but most people do not get it right. And what that tells us is that we're not very good at judging differences in area. Another optical illusion: which is the darkest of the small rectangles? And we pretty much guessed what's going to happen there. I assure you, as that moves across the screen, that is not changing color. And if you get the slides later and cut them out and lay them side by side, you will see they are the same color. What that tells us is that our eyes see relative color, not absolute color. So we have to be very, very careful. It would also tell us that using a graduated background like that may not be a good idea. And as Stephen Few puts it, we see images with our brains, not our eyes. Few things we can do. So don't display more or less than you need to. Generally, people display more than they need to. So all of the tools allow you to do that sort of thing. May look pretty, it's hard to see the message. That's the same data. We've made the labels horizontal. We've ordered it by actual from left to right, so we can see building North and Scotland division had the highest actuals. Much, much easier to see. We get rid of all the junk, as Stephen Few puts it, or non-data ink. Including visual differences in a graph that don't correspond to actual differences in the data. What do we mean by that? So using the same graph, we've got two different measures there, actual and forecast. There's a difference in the data. This one here, revenue by year, has got different years and the same measure, which is revenue. Giving that a different color is meaningless, and it just makes it look over the top from my perspective anyway. Also, one thing that happens quite commonly, and we have to be careful of this. This is done, sometimes this is done on purpose, and sometimes it's done by accident. It's the same data there. The only difference is that the left-hand graph hasn't got a zero-based scale. Now, if you, in Excel, if you've got data and you just choose a line graph, it will automatically scale like that, and it's not generally a very good idea. It can also be used as quite an emotive thing, so the press do this quite often. I would say deliberately. Using lengths and 2D locations to encode quantitative values works very well. So we could see that the second bar there is twice the height of the first graph, and position of dots also helps. We can see that we can pretty much guess that the upper dot is 3 times higher than the lower dot. Size we talked about earlier. It will give us a rough idea. It's not going to give us an exact idea, but sometimes, as in one of the examples we showed earlier, showing when you want to show a lot of things on the same graph, you could use size as an indicator. Also color intensity. We're tuned to think that darker is more, but again, we can't say by how much. Connecting values that are discrete is another fairly common problem. So connecting budgeted versus actual expenses across regions makes no sense. It suggests that there's a relationship between actual in north and actual in east, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Time series do make sense, and very often if you've got a time series that wants to be on the x-axis, left to right, and it makes sense to use a line graph and join those up. So a few do's there. We've covered a few of those. If you have to use tables, I would, I'm not going to cover all of those points, but the fourth point there, if you're going to use tables, keep them clean and simple. Generally, if you can get away with using tables, don't use them. You can see much more from a line graph or a bar chart, and you can hover over it if you need detail. It's very difficult to pick out values from tables and do comparisons. So sometimes you might have a business need to put a table in. So 3D, don't use it. Background color fill, avoid it. Less is more. Okay, just quickly on how to get started or improve. A number of things we can do, not necessarily in this order. You're going to need a tool of some sort. There's lots and lots of free versions out there. You'll need some data. What can you start with? What's being centrally stored that's being done consistently? You can get it every week or however often you need it, and is relevant and going to make a big difference. Create your visualizations, and there's a process around that which we can talk about, or we'll talk about shortly. And you may need some help, so a bit of training, coaching, or outsourcing. So this is a typical data visualization design process, and the process is iterative. It's mostly human, and I think what right data visualization all the time. You never finish it; it just goes on and on. So sometimes we should think about data projects. They are business as usual. That's what it might look like in a Gantt chart. Again, we can see iterations, developments, demo, development, demo. So going around a circle and improving all the time. How might you get help? Lots of training available. So data visualization principles. So the slides I showed earlier was a subset of training that we offer on demand, and also through our partnership with Stephen Few's organization. If you look on our website, there's a course coming up in September with Nick Desbarates. I'd highly recommend doing data visualization training. If you don't want to spend out for the course, please email me. I shall send you details of some books you can read, which will make a big difference, I can guarantee. Once you understand data visualization principles, then get training in your chosen tool. There's loads of free resources available online, so you can learn Power BI and Tableau and lots of the others online for no cost. There's also pre-packaged courses, and a lot of people will do bespoke training for you. On-the-job training is great. Outsourcing, if you don't have the time to do it for yourself, this is generally good value for money. I would say that being a consultant, of course, but it's you know, somebody that's an expert in this stuff can probably do it 3, 4, 5 times faster than you could. What I like doing is a combination of those things. So with a client is giving them some training, working with them on the job to the point where they're self-sufficient. So I'm just about done, so we're going to have enough time for questions, which is great. So I hope you've seen how some of the ways that your data could be exploited and best presented in order to address some real life situations, so help you realize benefits, how you might get started, and ultimately I hope that you've seen how implementing good data visualization could boost your value and the value for your organizations. That's me just about done.
Ian, I really enjoyed that, and I think, you know, from previous conversation, it's certainly some of the rules around data visualization and things like 3D circles, etc., being unhelpful. So that, I think, is something that I can pick up on immediately. We've got a couple of questions here around, actually how you go about getting this data. It's all very well, showing things like the feasibility versus benefits, but what have you got any, any suggestions on an approach to getting the data out of an organization?
So there's two problems. There's the technical problems and there's the organizational problems. So have you got the permissions to see the data? That's obviously the first. That shouldn't be too bad. I think people are less protective of their data now, and more people are demanding to see it. Technically, it's generally quite easy. So as we showed you there with Power BI, whatever your data source is, if it's SQL Server, if it's Oracle, if it's an accounting system, there's a way of connecting to it. So Power BI will just see it and draw the data out. So technically it's quite simple, and there's lots of other tools as well. So these data visualization, the two data visualization tools I showed, both have ETL capability, which is extract, transform and load. But there are specialist ETL tools out there as well. So Microsoft SSIS, there's Matillion, there's many other specialist heavyweight tools to get data out of source systems.
Thank you very much for your feedback on that. You have Ian's contact details, so please follow up with that. And please check out the APM website for future webinars and events. I know in terms of our effective benefits management series, we've just posted a webinar for October, a very interesting one on strategic decision making. So please take a look out for that. Okay, all that remains really is to thank you, Ian, for your presentation, and we look forward to seeing you again on future webinars.
Great, thank you everybody.